Takes down Scent, it's up to Ragnar and Black Poison, the only two left here trying to keep Bravado alive. Black Poison is going to be going down at the end to Pronax, who picks up a triple, and Fnatic will take it 16-2.
2 versus 1, but so little time left on that ball.
Terrorists win.
And that will be the end.
In 2014, a South African team played in the biggest Counter-Strike tournament in the world, the DreamHack Winter 2014. They played 2 games, winning a total of 3 rounds, getting absolutely dominated. But only a few months earlier, 2 other teams did almost exactly the same thing.
JW is going to get in on the action, gets himself the frag onto AZK, Days down, and it could be all she wrote. It is! The Americans are going home, and Fnatic, the first...
Sniper sur le BP, sniper qui repart un joueur, qui va donner finalement la victoire aux joueurs de la team LDLC.com face à des joueurs des VoxEminor qu'on n'attendait pas.
3 teams from 3 completely different regions, all with horrendous major debuts. And yet a lot of people forget or don't even know what they all had in common. They were all directly invited. So how in the world did that even happen? It's no secret that the Counter-Strike scene has been dominated by Europeans for most of, if not all of its competitive history. But that does not mean that there wasn't a growing competitive scene in other regions, because there was. The problem being that they were largely isolated. Europe had the best players, best teams, best tournaments, and most importantly the infrastructure or ecosystem to keep it consistent. So for much of the early majors, if you weren't directly invited, you basically had to go through a European qualifier. It was simply the hub of Counter-Strike and where the competitive scene was concentrated. And before proper international qualification existed like we have today, tournament organizers had another option: direct invites. This meant giving a handful of teams from growing regions a free pass to the biggest stage in Counter-Strike, even when they probably weren't prepared for it. And so you may be thinking that the tournament hosts were just handing out pity invites, and well, that was kind of true. However, there was one North American team to make that argument a bit harder to defend. With a lineup of Nothing, Hiko, Semphis, Sean Garez, and Swag, Complexity was attending DreamHack Winter 2013. And well, they weren't just some chumps from the lands of the free. Not long before, they'd finished second at the ESEA Global Finals. Then, at the Electronic Sports World Cup, they would start off quite well, but unfortunately lose to NIP in the quarterfinals, being the only North American team in attendance. And lastly, winning the North American quals to the MSI Beat It tournament in 2013. Unfortunately not being able to make it due to visa issues getting into China. Anyways, they were clearly one of the best teams in North America at the time, and at DreamHack Winter 2013, they got their chance. Their first match was against N Faculty, and they would handle them quite easily, winning 16-5. Their next opponent was Very Games, one of the best teams in the world at the time. And Complexity actually beat them, with Nothing leading the way, and a 1.6 rating from Shocks on the other side. That's crazy. But a supposed pity invite from North America just stole a W from one of the best teams in the world. And with that, they were off to the playoffs. The quarterfinal matchup was against Astana Dragons, another direct invite as one of the best teams from the CIS region. And well, 3 maps later, Complexity would come out with a W, where they would get 2-0'd by Fnatic in a fairly swift manner, who were the eventual champions to be fair. But they did finish in a 3rd, 4th placing in the first ever Counter-Strike major. So suddenly those invites didn't look quite as insane. Complexity was pretty good in their own right despite playing from North America, and I'm not saying all North American teams were this good or even close to that good, but it does prove that there is genuine talent in smaller, more isolated regions. But they're kind of the exception to this video, so let's move on. At the following major, Katowice 2014, the idea of regional representation was taken even further. For the tournament, there were 2 tournament spots specifically given away to non-European teams, eventually going to the previously mentioned iBuyPower and VoxEminor. VoxEminor consisting of AZR, Havoc, Sniper, Sponge, and Top Gun. They also qualified for the previously mentioned MSI Beat It tournament with relative ease through the Oceanic qualifiers, and would actually go on to play the tournament, making it to the semifinals after beating the Vietnamese powerhouse Legends. although eventually losing to Fnatic and then SK Gaming in the 3rd place game. So while it obviously was not the perfect tournament, they did play solid against some of the best teams in the world, and were the highest placed non-European team at the event, which was basically their only and one chance they had at proving themselves, and I mean they did pretty much. Because who knows, maybe that Vietnamese powerhouse could have placed 4th instead and got invited to the major. That would be crazy. VoxEminor were basically the best team in Australia and probably Asia as well at the time, so Valve and ESL gave them a chance, and for the first time ever an Australian team had a guaranteed spot at a major. And then there was iBuyPower, consisting of Skadoodle, Dazed, Adrian, AZK, and Anger. And unlike Vox, they had already proven themselves internationally quite a bit. They had just won the global finals of ESEA Season 15, taking down Titan 4 maps to 1, which was an incredible feat for basically any team that wasn't already elite. So they're arguably one of the best teams in North America. But once again, the problem was not the quality of the talent of the players or the teams, but simply no route to the best competition. So when there was no other option at the time, they simply gave an invite to North America. And so now it's kind of starting to make a bit more sense. The best team from North America, the best team from Australia, both with some results to justify being there. Until the major actually came. Neither of them would win a match, unfortunately. iBuyPower would lose comfortably to Dignitas, and then put up a solid performance against Fnatic before losing, as well as Vox making LDLC sweat a little bit before losing, before getting smoked by 3D Max the next game. Both teams 0-2, finishing in the 13th to 16th place. So for those thinking they didn't belong, that wasn't entirely unfair to think. The direct invite system was obviously a problem, not because they didn't deserve a chance to compete, but because they didn't have a fair way to prove that they deserved it. And on a business side of things, directly quoted, without those invites, non-European viewership would have been basically non-existent, especially with the lack of regional qualifiers to, gain awareness in the first place. But that was the basic idea of these invites. They weren't exactly perfect or fair, but they gave a chance to the teams who didn't have the best opportunity to prove themselves yet. And that's where we get into the worst of this experiment. This time we're not talking about the best team in North America, or even the best team in the oceanic scene. We're talking about the best team in damn South Africa. Bravado, consisting of Scent, Black Poison, Detroni, Deviant, and Rachno. Unlike their North American and Australian counterparts, Bravado had never actually played a team outside of Africa. In fact, they had barely played a team outside of South Africa. The scene was so isolated that international competition was basically non-existent, but them being at the major wasn't even actually supposed to happen in the first place. The final 2 spots at that major were supposed to be decided through an international qualifier, which fortunately for Bravado, was planned too late and fell through at the last minute. So that other invite spot went to MyXMG, a Danish roster consisting of Frizz, MSL, SMF, Hundin, and Achillean, after they just missed the last qualifying spot in the close qualifier. But even the falling through of that qualifiers kind of tells us what Valve and DreamHack were trying to achieve. They easily could have invited the next best European team, but instead they invited a promising roster from Denmark and the best damn team from South Africa. Their first game they played Fnatic, one of the best teams in the world at the time, and yeah, they got crushed 16-2. Then came Cloud9, which had some familiar names from the Complexity roster as well as Shroud, and they'd only get 1 round on them. 2 maps, 3 rounds, the worst team stat line at the tournament. It was definitely a disaster, and by looking strictly at the numbers, you'd be convinced that Bravado had no business being there. Which honestly, they had no business competing with most of these teams, but that's very different from saying they had no business being represented at the tournament. So I don't think Bravado was the problem. The problem was the system. Direct invitations could go wherever internationally, but they were inconsistent, subjective, and just unsustainable. Bravado was the last team to ever be directly invited to a major, mainly because Valve was trying to figure out this whole qualification thing. And while I do think Valve and these tournament organizers would have eventually figured it out, it's kind of fun and unbelievable just looking back at the gong show that Counter-Strike once was. So did anything actually change in these regions? Well, for Australia, they've had teams like the Renegades, Greyhound, and now regularly send at least 1 team to a major, as well as seeing the odd Aussie get picked up somewhere internationally. And well, for my precious North America, we've had some good teams like Complexity, Liquid, and Cloud9, with Cloud9 obviously winning us a major in 2018, and Liquid with the second ever and only North American Intel Grand Slam. But unfortunately, we're in pretty rough shape nowadays. And lastly, most unfortunately, the South African Counter-Strike scene. Now, I can't say I'm too well versed in South African Counter-Strike, However, Bravado is basically the best team the country has ever had. They are the only South African team with top 50 experience. Not many teams leave the country, let alone the continent, for any sort of competition. And to be fair, they do send some guys internationally, like JT, Sonic, missed them. But unfortunately, their scene just hasn't really taken off in any meaningful way. They were just lucky enough to be one of the first to be giving a meaningful opportunity. The early Counter-Strike majors weren't just trying to find the best teams in the world. They were trying to create a world where the best teams could come from anywhere. That's basically the whole idea of this video. If you made it this far, I appreciate you so much for watching. I thought this was a fun video to make, so let me know what you think. And yeah, so thank you for watching, and have a good day.